I did an interview about DvsM years ago where I compared dinosaurs to a burlesque fan dancer, of all things. You see a little bit, you get glimpses of them, but you never get to see them completely, and it makes your imagination go wild. You want to see the whole thing, but you can't, and that just makes you want to see the whole thing more. Dinosaurs are like that. Dinosaurs are like a good conspiracy theory or a murder mystery. It's something about their unknowableness. They're a maze without a center. No amount of thought or study or research will get you all the answers. Part of them will always be in shadow, and I think that's a large part of what makes them so fascinating. So as a kid who drew, of course, dinosaurs were a big part of my early portfolio. At first, they were mostly copied out of books. But as I got into my teens, I was better about doing my own thing. And all that made me really admire and envy paleo artists. To me, they seem to have the coolest art job in the world. I still feel that way. I think the first paleo artist that really blew my mind was Gregory S. Paul. He put out a book in the late 80s, Predatory Dinosaurs of the World, and he illustrated it all himself, and I was mesmerized. I had never seen dinosaurs like his. I think it was the first time I had seen a more modern idea of what dinosaurs probably looked like, where they were getting out of that kind of old school, 1 million years BC look and into something different. The way he drew dinosaurs, they were lithe and they were lean and they looked energetic. And it was really fresh. I had never seen anything like that. And I thought they were beautiful in a way, but also a little frightening. Not in a silly, monstrous way, not in a movie dinosaur way, but they were frightening like a shark or a Komodo dragon. They just looked like this thing that's not particularly smart and just made for eating. and there was something a little creepy about that. It's just jaws with legs to walk the jaws around. But I thought he did a very clever mix of reptile and bird, where they looked like both but neither. They weren't too far in either direction. They really looked like their own thing, their own kind of animal. Something that doesn't exist anymore, but you believe could. It looked like something that could be, like an animal that could be out there but you just hadn't seen before. And when I saw his drawings, I was like, yes, that's a dinosaur. I bet seeing a real dinosaur, even if it didn't look exactly like his drawings, and his haven't aged that great, but even if it didn't look like that, I bet it would feel like that. You would look at it and say, like, that's, of course that's what they look like. And I think I've always looked for that reaction ever since, whether it's looking at other people's dinosaurs or the ones that I draw. It's also made me a bit judgy when it comes to paleo art. Now, for the record, I am not a paleontologist. I am not a paleo artist. But I guess I follow it all just enough to have some strong feelings about what makes for a good or a bad reconstruction. I kind of feel like the pendulum has swung too far in the other direction in a lot of contemporary paleo art. I mean, obviously when people were first drawing dinosaurs, they made them these lumbering, slow-witted, miserable-looking behemoths. But in those artists' and scientists' defenses, they were just reconstructing them based on what they knew, and what they thought they knew was that they were basically reptiles, and they were just comparing them to modern reptiles. That's how we naturally want to understand a dinosaur. We want to compare it to something we know. And I think that's the same way we're going astray today. Now we know dinosaurs were the ancestors of birds. Now we know at least the smaller ones were warm-blooded. Now we know they had feathers, or at least proto-feathers, some of them. So we know they weren't giant iguanas, like we pictured 100 years ago. But now, like I said, I think the pendulum has swung way past that. Now you see reconstructions that look like modern songbirds and pheasants, and turkeys, eagles. And that stuff, again, as an amateur, I just don't buy. I can't imagine why a non-flying animal living 100 million years ago would look so much like its modern flying descendant today. There's no reason for it to look streamlined and clean and aerodynamic. Again, we're doing the same thing they were doing 100 years ago. We're just reconstructing them based on something we know. And so instead of iguanas, we're making them look like sparrows. And I think it makes just as much sense as it did 100 years ago. I think Paul was on the right track. A dinosaur isn't a bird or lizard. It's a dinosaur. It should look like both, and neither. It should look unique. So all this made coming up with my own designs for the dinosaurs in DvsM 1997 very difficult. I accidentally set a really high bar for myself. Especially in a comic series with a more realistic look, where people look like people and houses look like houses and cars look like cars. You can't just drop Dino from the Flintstones or even the raptors from Jurassic Park into a comic like this. The look of DvsM sort of demands that you find that Gregory Paul sweet spot of, yeah, that could be an animal. Another challenge with finding the look of your dinosaurs is every single dinosaur you've ever seen in your life is some other artist's interpretation. And you don't want to crib from anybody else. So, you look at all these examples to get a feel, but ultimately, after you do that, you have to try and find your own path through this forest, and that's really hard. It's really hard. I looked at everything. I put myself through a little self-imposed college course in a couple species of dinosaurs just to have a good foundation to work from. And I was looking at skeletons. I was looking at every piece of paleoart I could get my hands on. I was really trying to get an innate sense of all the different ideas of how this thing looked, from which hopefully I could sprout something that was a credible but unique take. It turned out to be the hardest thing about drawing this comic, and I did not expect that. I thought drawing all the facial expressions was going to be hard. I was worried about that. I was worried about drawing the women's hair. I did not think this would be the boogeyman, but it turned out every time I was starting a new page where I knew there was a dinosaur on it, my anxiety spiked. Now, by comparison, the Marsbot was a breeze. The main issue with that was just updating my original design. I first drew a Marsbot probably about 7 years ago or something, and DvsM was a very different thing then. It was mostly prints, there was not a lot of story, there was no comic. It was a lot cartoonier, and it leaned really hard into the campiness of the concept. It really was Mars Attacks meets Jurassic Park. It was a concept that I invented solely to rationalize drawing aliens and robots fighting dinosaurs. That was it. So the Marsbot drew heavily from a long and proud B-movie and pulp tradition of marauding extraterrestrial robots. To be honest, I didn't really spend too much time agonizing over its design. It was the heel. It was the thing you wanted to watch a dinosaur pull apart. That was the only purpose it served. So when the time came to introduce Marsbots to the comic, that design wasn't going to work. It was too simple, too silly, too cartoony. But that being said, I didn't want to stray too far from the basic idea. My goal was to come up with a redesign that looked interesting and alien and intimidating and mature, but clearly shared some DNA with my original. So my approach was, let's pretend the original Marsbot is how a 5-year-old would draw it. So for the comic, let's show the real thing, what it actually looks like. So that reined me in. It kept me from totally reinventing the wheel and exploring designs with 4 legs or whatever. The original defined the parameters. It needs to be bipedal. It will have a clear dome on top, and it will be piloted by alien. It will have these shield-generating lenses on the front that look vaguely like eyes. It won't be enormous. It'll be at most maybe twice the height of a man. And it needs claws. Not just a ray gun or something abstract like that. It needs something that looks intimidating in a visceral way. Something that looks sharp or painful or dangerous. I know this is all a bit of a tease. And I swear it's not just a tactic to try and sell books, I promise. I just very honestly believe the best way to see the Marsbot or to see the dinosaurs is on the page, in the comic, seeing how they're revealed, seeing them for the first time in a story context. I'm fully aware it's antiquated thinking in a day when everyone posts their whole comic online to read for free. But I don't know. One of the perks to being your own boss is being able to do whatever you think is best and feels right. And, holding reveals back feels right to me. I like turning pages in comics and being surprised by what's next. I like anticipating. I like wondering. In a few weeks, if you're interested, you'll have the book in your hands and you'll be able to read it frontwards and backwards a dozen times and study every panel under a magnifying glass. Eventually, you'll get to take the fan dancer home. But for now, you gotta wait just a little bit longer. Just a little bit.